Here Comes McBroom by Fleischman, Part 2. Shovels, my lambs, heap these wagons full of topsoil. The mosquitoes were rising in swarms, growing more temperish by the hour. I heard a cackling sound, and there stood Heck Jones. Hee haw, neighbor, clearing out, giving up. Why, I've got 3 nails left. Last chance. Sir, I said, your rusty old nails are a bamboozle and a hornswoggle. I intend to do a bit of rainmaking and break this drought. Hee haw, he laughed and ambled off. Before long, we were ready to go. It might be a longish trip, so we loaded up with picnic hampers, rolls of chicken wire, and our raincoats. Where are we going, Pa? Jill called from one of the wagons. Hunting, my lambs. We're going to track down a rain cloud and wet down this topsoil. But how, Pa? Asked Tim. I lifted the bird cage from under the wagon seat. Presto, I said, and whipped off the cover. Look at that lost looking, scared looking, long tailed creature. Found it hiding from the skeeters under a milk pail this morning. It's a genuine rain crow, my lambs. A rain crow, Mary said. It doesn't look like a crow at all. Correct and exactly, I said, smiling. It looks like a yellow-billed cuckoo, and that's what it is. But don't folks call them rain crows? Why, that bird can smell a downpour coming 60 miles away, rattles its throat and begins to squawk. All we got to do was follow that squawk. But you never heard such a quiet bird. We traveled miles and miles across the prairie, this way and the other, and not a rattle out of that rain crow. The big dry had done its mischief everywhere. We didn't see a dog without its tongue dragging, and it took 2 of them to bark at us once. A farmer told us he hadn't been able to grow anything at all but baked potatoes. We came to a field of sorghum cane, and our wagon wheels almost got stuck fast. I thought at first we had run over chewing gum, but no. That sweet cane had melted down to molasses and was dripping across the road. Day after day, we hauled our 3 loads of topsoil across the prairie, but that rain crow didn't so much as clear his throat. These youngins were getting impatient. Speak up, Rain Crow, Chester muttered desperately. Rattle, Hester pleaded. Squawk, said Peter. Please, said Mary. Just a peep would help. Not a cloud appeared in the sky. I'll confess I was getting a mite discouraged. And the 4th of July, not another 2 weeks off. We curled up under chicken wire that night, as usual, as the big skeeters kept banging into us so you could hardly sleep. Rattled like a hailstorm. And suddenly, at daybreak, I rose up laughing. Hear that? The youngins crowded around the rain crow. We hadn't been able to hear its voice rattle for the mosquitoes. Now it turned in its cage, gazed off to the northwest, opened its yellow beak, and let out a real ear-bursting rain cry. Quack, quack, quack. Put on your raincoats, my lamb, I said as we rushed to the wagons. Quack, quack, quack. Didn't we raise dust? That bird faced northwest like a dog on point. There was a rain cloud out there, and before long Jill gave a shout. I see it! And the others chimed in one after the other. Me too! Caw, caw, caw! We headed directly for that lone cloud, and the young'uns yelling, the horses snorting, and the birds squawking. Glory be! The first raindrop spattered as large as quarters. And my, didn't the young'uns frolic in that cloudburst? They lifted their faces and opened their mouths and drank right out of the sky. They splashed about and felt mud between their toes for the first time in ages. We all forgot to put on our raincoats and got wet as fish. Our dried up topsoil soaked up raindrops like a sponge. It was a joy to behold. But if we stayed longer, we'd get stuck in the mud. Back in the wagons, I shouted, home, my lambs, and not a moment to lose. Well, home was right where we left it, and so was Heck Jones. He was fixing to give his house a fresh coat of paint. I reckon with the money he got selling rusty nails, he even bought himself a skeeter-proof suit of armor and was clanking around in it. He lifted the steel visor. Howdy, neighbor. Come back to put your farm up for sale? I'll make you a generous offer, a nickel an acre. Preposterous, sir, I replied, my temper rising. Why, farmers all over the county are ready to sell out if this drought doesn't break in 24 hours. 5 cents an acre, that's my top price, neighbor. Our farm is not for sale, I declared, and the drought is about over. I'm going to make rain. Hee haw, he cackled. The big drought's only half of it. You don't see any skeeters, do you? But they'll be back, and you'll wish you had a suit of armor, same as me. They chased the blacksmith out of his shop. Yep, and they're busy sharpening their noses on his grindstone. Sell, neighbor, and run for your lives. Never, sir, I answered. But I did rush my dear wife Melissa and the youngest into the house. Then I got a pinch of onion seeds and went from wagon to wagon, sowing a few seeds in each load of moist earth. I didn't want to crowd those onions. Now that rich topsoil of ours had been idle a long time. It was raring to go. Before I could run back to the house, the greens were up. By the time I could get my shotgun, the tops had grown 4 or 5 feet tall. Onions are terribly slow growers. Before I could load my shotgun, the bulbs were finally busting up through the soil. We stood at the windows watching. Those onion roots were having a great feast. The wagons heaved and creaked as the onions swelled and lifted themselves. They were already the size of pumpkins, but that wasn't near big enough. Soon they were larger than wash tubs and began to shoulder the smaller ones off the wagons. Suddenly, we heard a distant roaring in the air. Those zigzagging, hot-tempered, blood-sucking prairie mosquitoes were returning from town with their stingers freshly sharpened. The big dry hadn't done their dispositions any good. Their tempers were at a boil. You gonna shoot them down, Paul? Will asked. Too many for that, I answered. How big do those onions have to grow? Chester asked. How big are they now? A little smaller than a cowshed. That's big enough, I nodded, lifting the window just enough to poke the shotgun through. Well, the Gallipiner spied the onions. I had planted blood red onions, and came swarming over our farm. I let go of the bulbs with a double charge of buckshot and slammed the window. Handkerchiefs, everyone, I called out. The odor of fresh cut onions shot through the air, under the door and through the cracks. Cry. In no time, our handkerchiefs were as wet as dish rags. Well, you never saw such surprised Gallipiners. They zing-zanged every which way, most of them backward, and weep. Their eyes began to flow like sprinkling cans. Onion tears. The roof began to leak. Mud puddles formed everywhere. Before long, the downpour was equal to any cloudburst I ever saw. The skeeters kept their distance after that, but they've been mighty helpful. With our farm freshly watered, we grew tons of great onions, 3 or 4 crops a day, gave them away to farmers all over the county. We broke the big drought, and that's how I came to be known as McBroom, the Rainmaker. We didn't hear a he or a haw out of Heck Jones. Inside his clanking suit of armor, he grumbled and growled and finished painting his house. And that was a mistake, for the Gallipiners hadn't left the county. They had just flocked off somewhere for a breath of fresh air. Well, they flocked back. I was standing with my shoes in the earth. My feet had been a torment ever since our dry topsoil had shrunk the leather. Little Clorinda, I said, kindly plant a vegetable clock. I reckon it'll take 1 minute exactly to grow these shoes 2 sizes larger. She planted a cucumber seed, and that's when the Gallipiners returned. Flocks and flocks of them. And my, didn't they look hungry? You could see their ribs standing out. They headed for Heck Jones' house as if he'd rung the dinner bell. That ornery, wily neighbor of ours had painted his house full-headed red. Well, the huge skeeters dropped like hawks. They speared the wood siding on their long grindstone-sharpened stingers. Must have gone clear through, for we could see Heck Jones in the windows, hammering over the tips. Oh, he was chuckling and cackling. The Gallipiners flapped their wings like caught roosters, thousands of them. The next thing I knew, all those flapping wings lifted the house a few inches, then a foot. I was surprised to see the floor remain behind. I reckon Heck Jones had pulled the nails to sell. Then those prairie mosquitoes gave a mighty heave and flew off with the house. Little Clorinda and I were so dumbfounded we forgot about the cucumber clock. It had grown 37 blossoms. I tripped over my own feet, and no wonder. My shoes had grown more than a yard long. Gawk, gawk, gawk. Glory be, rain, and it wasn't long in coming. I almost felt sorry for Heck Jones the next day. He could be seen walking his floor without a roof over his head in the downpour. The youngins had a splendid 4th of July. Grew all the fireworks they wanted. They dashed about with bean shooters, shooting radish seeds into the ground. You know how fast those radishes come up. In our rich topsoil, they grew quicker than the eye. The seeds hardly touched the ground before they took root and swelled up and exploded. They go off like strings of firecrackers. And mercy, what a racket. At nightfall, a scared cat ran up a tree, and I went up a ladder to get it down, reached in the branches and caught it by the tail. I'd be lying if I didn't admit the truth. It was a skunk.